After years of Houdini-like escape from responsibility, billionaire hedge fund manager and friend of presidents Jeffrey Epstein is facing new federal sex trafficking charges and up to 45 years behind bars. Prosecutors claim he paid girls as young as 14 to engage in sex acts and to help recruit other young victims over a period of several years in both New York and Palm Beach in Florida. Epstein pled not guilty to the charges yesterday, but a, quote, vast trove of lewd photographs of young women and girls, which police say they seized from his Manhattan mansion, are bolstering the prosecution's case.
Many of the underage girls that Epstein allegedly victimized were particularly vulnerable to exploitation. The alleged behavior shocks the conscience.
Charges are also raising new questions about a previous sex crimes case against Epstein in 2008, which started with similar accusations but ended with a plea deal and a cushy 13 months in a private wing of a Palm Beach County jail, during which time he was allowed to continue going into the office every day. Closer to home, another high-profile sexual assault case is taking a turn in a very different direction. The judge overseeing a sexual assault case against actor Kevin Spacy on Nantucket says he might have to dismiss the criminal charges after the accuser refused to answer certain questions about a missing cell phone in court yesterday. That accuser claims Spacey groped him in a Nantucket bar 3 years ago when he was 18 years old. Late last week, he withdrew a civil suit against Spacey. But why? Joining me to discuss are Dan Small, a partner at Holland Knight and the host of a new podcast series called Powerful Witness Preparation. I could have used that 40 years ago. And criminal defense attorney Janice Bassil, who has represented a number of defendants and accusers in sex offense cases in Massachusetts. Janice, it's good to see you, too. Can we start with Spacey and then we'll work backwards?
Sure.
Roughly a week or so ago, Mitchell Garabedian, representing the family, and the accuser, files a civil suit against Spacey. And about a week later, he not only withdraws it, but he withdraws it with prejudice, which I remember from my legal training a while ago means you can't bring it again. That meant to me they had cut a deal. Was I wrong?
Apparently you were wrong. Apparently this case is getting so bad that they did not want to expose the victim to depositions and discovery.
So why with prejudice, though? Why not just withdraw the case, and maybe if you decide to file later, you do, and if you don't, you don't?
I don't know. The only thing I saw was Mitchell Garabedian saying that his client wanted to sort of fight it in one arena at a time. I was really surprised by that, and I too thought a deal had been cut, but I've been told no.
When you say you've been told no, the objective evidence suggests that the fact that there was a hearing yesterday and that the criminal case was not part of a deal suggests to me that there was no deal, right?
As far as I know. I mean, look, people talk about a settlement long before any charges, any civil complaint gets filed. I don't know if discussions were had, the civil complaint was filed in order to push those negotiations, but it sounds like they're over.
So the accuser in this case, again, takes the fifth after some testimony when he's asked about the whereabouts of the phone. He's not going to answer questions. The judge obviously had to strike all his testimony at that point. If the young man, I think now 21 or something around there, decides he's not going to testify, the case is over, is it not? I mean, without the accuser, there's no case.
Correct.
Do you agree with that?
The case is basically over now. You've got a one-on-one where apparently they deleted evidence and they've now taken the Fifth Amendment about that deletion. The case will be over before the end of the week.
You know, there's so many terms, dismissed or withdrawn?
Dismissed.
By the judge, you think, in this case?
I do.
Yeah. You know, I have to say, there's so many things I don't understand. One, the father in this case gets into a very combative thing with the prosecutor. And
see, they needed witness preparation.
Exactly. They should listen to your podcast. And the judge threatens to hold him in contempt. Heather Unruh, who everybody knows, who was here with Mitchell Garabedian months ago, admits she deleted certain things from the phone, but says they had nothing to do with the case, even though she's not the person. It seems to me to be making that kind of decision, right?
The other thing that was extremely so first of all, you couldn't trust her to make that decision, but the second part of this that really bothered me was that the state trooper didn't document that until 2 weeks ago. Which really
didn't document the handing of the phone, or what do you mean?
Didn't document that information had been deleted from the phone.
So what is that about?
That's pretty egregious, and it's surprising because I usually find that the state police work very hard to, dot their I's and cross their T's.
You got a very high-level case that just is falling apart and no one's handled it right.
So in light of the fact you think it's going to fall apart, forget the other things I was going to ask you, then answer a non-legal thing for me, which is a real issue with me that I know will anger a lot of people at home. I don't like the fact that places like the Globe and WGBH, by the way, choose not to disclose the name of the accuser. And by the way, some would argue in this case it's doubly ridiculous in light of the fact we know who the father by name and the mother, who's famous by name, is. And my argument is it sort of stigmatizes sex crimes even worse than they are to begin. You've done a ton of these.
Correct.
Where do you fall on this spectrum?
I mean, I find it, you know, I'm busy correcting every pleading so that I only put in people's initials. I find it a little ridiculous because you have a right to a public hearing. It is a public trial. If anybody sits in the audience, they're going to hear full names and addresses. It's also like you did something
wrong. I mean,
correct.
It sounds. Where are you on this issue?
I don't think it helps the debate to have the names, and I think providing some level of protection is acceptable. I don't have a problem.
Even though it's voluntary, as we know,
Yes,
on the part of
exactly.
news organizations. Can we move to Jeffrey Epstein for a minute? I mentioned a deal is cut with Jeffrey Epstein by the guy who's now the Labor Secretary, Alex Acosta, for the President of the United States. Gets this cushy deal. Acosta himself says he had nothing to do with the deal, and the President of the United States seems to parrot that line. Here's what Donald Trump had to say about his Secretary of Labor.
I feel very badly, actually, for Secretary Acosta, because I've known him as being somebody that works so hard and has done such a good job. You're talking about a long time ago. And again, it was a decision made, I think, not by him, but by a lot of people.
Not by him. So he's corroborating what Acosta says, other than the fact that Miami Herald has emails suggesting that, in fact, Acosta met with the defense attorney for Jeffrey Epstein. There's so many unusual things in this case I want to ask you about, too, if I may, starting with you. There's a judge in Florida that may reopen this case 10 years later, saying that something called the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which apparently statutorily requires that victims be consulted before plea deals are taken, was not complied with because the survivors weren't talked to. Is a case ever overturned for violation of a law like that?
Sure.
A deal overturned?
Sure. The deal is a contract. The government was required to notify the victims. That's a fundamental part of the law. The deal, I think, will be invalid.
Do you agree with that?
No, because the defendant should not bear the burden of the fact that the victims weren't notified by the prosecutor. It's not his obligation to notify the victims. It's the prosecutor's obligation. And I don't know about the Florida law, but our law here says that the victims have the right to be notified. They don't have the right to control the outcome.
Well, I understand that, but I don't think they were even notified in this circumstance.
Right.
So if you were in court and she made that argument, what would you respond? How would you respond to it?
I'd say there's a very strong public policy in favor of victims of crime being part of the process. They don't control the process, that's clear, but they have a right to be notified.
One other odd part of this, which I have never heard of, but I'm assuming you may or have, is immunity was granted to any potential co-conspirators in this case a decade ago. Now, the reason that's particularly significant, as we've learned, Jeffrey Epstein has friends in very high places, from Bill Clinton, who used to ride on his plane, to Donald Trump, to Alan Dershowitz represented him a long time ago. Is that odd to grant immunity to potential co-conspirators who are not before the court?
No, and you get a lot of cases where not only are there lots of people granted immunity, but there are unindicted co-conspirators that are never going to get charged. So it's not unusual, but it seemed to me, my sense of it, and I tried to look this up today, is I'm not sure there was ever a federal case actually filed. It's a little unclear to me. I couldn't find it.
So you mean to begin with?
Yeah.
Prior to the well, one way is if you're right and she's wrong, if you're right and this case is reopened because of the violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act, would those immunity grants be vitiated as well? And we might end up finding out who some of his friends who may have participated in some of these acts with young girls?
Yeah, if the deal is gone, the deal is gone. And so we may find out. Now, they may not bother with that because the new case may trump it, to coin a phrase, may take over from that and may actually end up being bigger than that. They found a lot of evidence in this new case. So it's more, although the charge against them right now is the old case, there's going to be a lot more charges against him.
Last thing about this, about a year or so ago, when lawyers like you were sitting here and the charges were piling up against Harvey Weinstein, I said something stupid like, well, he's gone forever, and the charges are disappearing and disappearing. I won't make the same stupid comment about Epstein. Is Epstein in deep trouble, or it's too early to know?
Well, I think anytime anyone gets indicted by the federal government, you're in deep trouble, because the ability to sort of maneuver in federal court is far less than it is in state court. And I think that he's got some decent issues. I mean, there's a long pre-indictment delay. There's the question of whether there was an agreement with the U.S. attorney. Does that cover other U.S. attorneys'
Well, they say
offices?
they're new victims in this case, so that they may do crimes quickly. 15 seconds. Is Epstein in deep? You know what?
He's in a lot of trouble. They had probable cause to indict. They arrested him coming off his airplane. That means that there's something else going on here.
I'd call you too if I were him. Janice, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
your time.